Hey everybody, this is Dr. Jeremy Sharp. Welcome to the Testing Psychologist podcast, episode number 10. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Testing Psychologist podcast. I'm excited to be talking with Dr. Megan Warner today. Megan is a clinical psychologist and the owner and founder of Guilford Psychological Services in Guilford, Connecticut, a practice that's currently in the process of being developed. After running her own private practice for a number of years, Megan saw a need to form a central location where individuals throughout the region could find compassionate, non-judgmental, and scientifically driven providers that offer high-quality individual and group support to help people find and reclaim themselves and build the lives they yearn to have. Guilford Psychological Services expands upon Megan's thriving private practice and will offer individualized, high-quality, high-end support informed and designed by science. In her practice, Megan specializes in trauma, mindfulness-based approaches, perinatal and postpartum mood and anxiety, and collaborative therapeutic assessment, which we'll be talking about today. In addition to running her practice, she's an assistant clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine. She is also a wife and a mother to 2 young children. Megan, welcome to the Testing Psychologist.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. So I have to ask right off the bat, doing that introduction, when you tell people that you work at Yale, how do they respond?
If I tell people in Arkansas that I work at Yale, they think that's amazing. But if I tell people up here in Connecticut that I work at Yale, that's the most ordinary thing you could ever hear up here. Why are you telling me that is sort of the response. And what about it? That's kind of, everybody works at Yale up here. That's sort of the position. Although it's great. It's wonderful.
Sure. It's all relative, I suppose.
It's all relative. I mean, not everybody works at Yale, but it's a lot of therapists and a lot of, people have kind of shared appointments or do a lot of things. It's because it's nice. It's nice to work over there. I love it.
Sure. That sounds great. Yeah. I have to admit, I had a little employment envy reading that description. So
employment. I should say I volunteer. It's really, let's call it voluntary. But I get access to the library, and there's all sorts of perks they give you. So it's good.
That's worth it.
Yeah, it's totally worth it. It's good.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on the show. This is, like I said, really exciting. We are going to be having a chat about therapeutic or collaborative assessment, which is something that you have integrated into your practice over the years. And I've got lots of questions for you, but maybe we could just start with how you got into assessment and decided to integrate that into your practice in the first place.
Yeah, I've always liked assessment. I've always liked data and numbers and kind of how things look statistically and how they match how we, experience them in our lives. And so what drew me to the field in the first place was the study of personality. So I was at University of Iowa and learning about personality, and that's what really kind of sealed my desire to go into the research side of psychology for a while. Because personality measurement is really interesting. So my background was at first in personality, and so when I was looking at grad schools, I was really drawn to places where I could continue measurement and look at measurement and also develop my clinical skills. So on the scientific side, I like that measurement side, and it goes so nicely with clinical work when you can use it in a way that you can kind of marry the two.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, so you specifically look for graduate programs that integrated more assessment into the training, is that right?
Yeah, so the advisor that I was drawn to, so I ended up going to Texas A&M, and the guy that I ended up working with, his name is Les Morey, and he's fabulous. He wrote the PAI, and so that was when I kind of found that school and knew I had the chance to be working with him. I was pretty excited because the PAI is a great measure. It's a clinical measure. You get some personality data from it. And so that was the draw. And then obviously once you're working with someone who developed a measure, you get a lot of measurement, experience. And so it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So he was an author of the PAI. That's incredible.
Yeah.
You got to work with him.
It was, he's incredible. I was very lucky.
Yeah, that's great. So just in case for anyone who's listening who might not know, the PAI, Personality Assessment Inventory, is one of the, I'd say, major personality assessments for adults, and there's an adolescent version as well, right, Megan?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a great clinical measure. So you get things like depression and anxiety, and like for example, the depression scale goes into subscales of like cognitive signs of depression and affective symptoms of depression, physiological. And so most of the scales are like that, where you sort of can break down something that feels like a diagnostic issue into their subsets. And there's quite a bit of personality data kind of mixed throughout. And you can take it online. It's great. The PAI. It's kind of like the rival to the MMPI. So people that use the MMPI, can also check out the PAI.
Yeah, right. I know everybody has their preferences in what measures they use.
Certainly.
And I actually, with all the testing that we do here in our practice, I switched over to primarily using the PAI probably 18 months ago, something like that. And I really like it.
Do you like it?
I think it serves. I do. Yeah, I do really like it. I mean, we can always dig into the nuts and bolts of different assessment measures, but I like it because it feels a little bit more accessible to me than, say, the MCMI-4, which is sort of my alternative personality measure. It just feels a little more easy to read and, like I said, maybe more accessible or personable.
Totally.
That's a way to describe it.
I say good choice, good choice with the PAI.
Yeah. You're not biased.
No, not a bit.
So I was going to ask, why do you use the PAI? But that sort of answers that question. So let me go back a little bit and just talk with you. Our topic for today is therapeutic assessment or collaborative assessment. So can you just speak a little bit to what that is and how that might be different than a typical evaluation or assessment?
Yeah, if you think about like a sort of a typical assessment, the traditional approach is we're hired by, a parent or a psychiatrist or primary care or client comes to us saying, so-and-so says I need to be assessed. I need a neuropsych assessment or I need a diagnostic assessment. So the client sort of comes in a position of, seeking our expertise and our authority, but it's certainly not an equivalent dynamic in any sense of the word. So traditional assessment is there's a little bit of a power differential or a lot of a power differential depending on who's doing the assessment. And the goals are to diagnose or to treat, to increase understanding, but it's not usually a collaborative process. Obviously, the assessment process involves two people or more, but it's not necessarily a therapeutic assessment or a collaborative assessment. The idea is that you're working with the client to try to answer questions or to try to give them something that's positive as a result of the assessment. So really, it's kind of like who the client is shifted. The client isn't necessarily the psychiatrist or the teacher or whatever. The client really is the client who's coming in to be assessed. What can you give them when you're generating data? And you're also, of course, generating the data that you can use for a bigger assessment measure. But the idea is that assessment in itself, that assessment experience can be something that is positive and may help therapeutically, may help the client have some positive impact on their life.
I really like how you put that phrase of the focus, the client kind of shifts from being the referral source to the actual person who you are working with, which kind of makes intuitive sense, but you're right, that's not always how it works out with traditional evaluation sometimes.
Right. I mean, the idea is that, we say, okay, well, I'm an expert on this test. Sure, I'm an expert on the PAI at this point in my life, but who is the expert, on the client? Really, it's the client. So we really just put our kind of trust, and that just is a spirit of equality, which I think is really nice for the clients, because it's really intimidating to come in and get assessed. And if they think that you're working sort of for them and with them instead of like, oh, I just want to evaluate you, you're a set of numbers and I'm going to write a report on you, it's scary. And it's not really so direct. It's about them, but it's not immediately clear how they're going to gain from all that data.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I have so many folks who come into the office and one of the first things they say is some variation of, we've never done this before, I don't know what this is about, finding some way to voice their vulnerability or apprehension about being there. And we don't get a great representation in the media, I think, especially with assessment and evaluation. It doesn't typically look good.
Right.
So
that's exactly
this is
right.
really important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, maybe you may want to try this. I'm hoping that a lot of the people that listen to this will give this a shot. When you have somebody come in and you say, okay, well, so the main therapeutic assessment idea is that you say, okay, well, what 3 or 4 questions do you have about yourself? What do you actually want to know? And when clients can sort of say, well, like, gosh, nobody's actually ever asked them what they want to know about themselves. Like it's not, when you're going for an assessment, you're deferring to the expert about what you should be knowing about yourself. So if you ask the client, hey, what have you always wondered about yourself? And what feedback are people giving you about how people say you are, how people say you function? Usually people will say, well, like a good example, I have a couple cases that, I can sprinkle in through here. And a good example is I saw somebody years ago whose parents had said, you're so angry all the time. And so, one of her questions was, I don't feel like I'm so angry all the time. Am I so angry all the time? And as it turned out, she was just extremely introverted and painfully shy. And her parents had been misconstruing this shyness. So she had a question. It was a really easy question to answer with the assessment. And she was able to bring them the assessment report, which was tailored to her questions. And they healed a rift. They came to understand that it wasn't, it wasn't anger at all. She was just not really that verbal and preferred to be alone. So I
love that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stories like that. I mean, it's really empowering. It's really empowering to the clients. So I should also say, as we talk about this, just to sort of add that therapeutic assessment, collaborative assessment, I'll probably suggest you put a book on you probably have like show notes, right? But I'll tell you really okay, perfect. So a really good book is this book called In Our Client's Shoes, which talks about one type of therapeutic assessment. So the idea of therapeutic assessment with like little t, little a, is it's a spirit of, having an attitude that assessment is more than just collecting information and that we want this to be a positive experience for our clients. But therapeutic assessment with a capital T and a capital A is a semi-structured approach that has been developed by this guy, Stephen Finn. He's this like really cool guy. He's out of University of Texas at Austin. And that's why I suggest, whoever is interested in this, pick up this book, In Our Client's Shoes. So I'm going to talk about his approach, which is a semi-structured approach of how people kind of come up with their questions and how it works. But in the interest of like full disclosure, they do have a certification process, and I don't want to like convey that I'm certified in it. They have a credentialing process. I was trained in it. I feel pretty competent. I feel okay saying I know what I'm talking about, but I'm not technically certified, as some of these things have a certification process.
Sure. Yeah, of course, appreciate that disclosure.
Yeah.
So let's dig into maybe some of the nuts and bolts of this. I'm interested, of course, in the business aspect of it and how you added it to your practice, marketed assessment service initially, got clients, how much you charge for an assessment like this, that kind of stuff. And then, maybe we can transition and talk about like what it actually looks like in the room and the experience with the client, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, I will follow your lead and answer whatever you want.
Great. Yeah. Well, let's start with, how did you initially add these assessments to your practice? How did you make time for them? How much time is required? How long's the report? All that kind of stuff.
Well, when I opened my practice, this was always going to be part of the practice. So this has been something that has been present in my practice from the get-go because I think the value is so great and it's really great for new clients. It kind of establishes a collaborative relationship from the start. So it's always been part of the practice. How much time I allot for them, usually the assessments I use can be done by the clients at home, over the internet. And then, you probably have seen this with the PAI. There's software and you can actually send people the link, and I use a few other measures. So I don't need to allot a tremendous amount of time, luckily, because I'm not having to supervise people actually filling out, the items in my office. But I would say a good like therapeutic assessment, good collaborative assessment probably takes me maybe 2 to 3 hours total. I probably take longer than I need to conceptualize and look at the numbers and data, I could probably be faster, but I'm a little bit fussy. But I'd say 2 to 3 hours of time.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a fair chunk of time, I suppose. Yeah. Now, do you structure it so that you have time set aside each week to write the reports, or you just kind of fit it in between your appointments? How does that work?
I don't have a set amount of time. Like, I don't have a report writing time. I try to keep my caseload to a number that's manageable for me so that, I set aside like Wednesday afternoons and Fridays to do administrative things. So that's where that would fall. Like I would, Wednesdays and Fridays are sort of the designated writing time and phone call time and catch up on note time. So I'm not doing more of them than I can handle. So I'm not in a situation where I'm having to kill myself, finding time, because usually that Wednesday afternoon or Friday time is enough for what I have on my plate. But that's a tenuous balance. I'm working on it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Know
right?
that all too well.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And I am curious, is a therapeutic assessment something that you would do with your existing clients, like in the middle of a course of therapy, or is it more of a one-off service that other clinicians might refer to you to work with their clients, or how does that work?
Both of those. If I had it my way, and I just haven't made this happen, I would actually do it with everybody that comes in, because you have an idea of a case, and it's so helpful to kind of, flesh out your conceptualization. And sometimes I'm just wrong, but for efficiency's sake, I haven't done it with everybody that comes in. Where I trained in grad school, towards the end of my grad school career, we did start doing it with everybody that came in, which was wonderful, because you start the therapy process with a lot of data. But at this point, how I'm doing it is sometimes I do it with clients at the start. Like if I feel like people are really struggling and they know something's wrong, but they don't know what's wrong, and they like really have no idea, but they want to figure it out. Sometimes that's a good time to offer it, because it's like, well, why don't we bring in some numbers? Like let's do an assessment. Usually people think that sounds fun and interesting, especially when I say like, what questions do you have about yourself? Because then it doesn't feel so scary. It's like they know they're going to get something great out of it. But I do sometimes also introduce it in the middle of therapy, because I get stuck with clients just like we all do. And sometimes I think like there's something else going on, but I can't figure out what it is. And so sometimes then I'll suggest like, have you ever done any assessment? Maybe we should try. I have this like really great approach, and, we'll answer questions you have about yourself or questions we have about the work. Like that's where sometimes I'll say, what about this? Like maybe we have a question about this. But then it can also be a one-off, like people can just come in, there's just value in having the assessment. There's positives that can come from people coming in just for 2 or 3 sessions. And then also, psychiatrists, other psychologists can send clients that they're stuck with, to me. So there's a number of avenues in which they come in.
Yeah. I like that part that you said about, people are just kind of curious. And if you frame it like, what do you want to know about yourself? That's a nice way to open the process.
Totally.
So with the referral process, I am curious about that. How do you get the word out, so to speak, that you do these assessments and let others in the community know that they can refer their clients for a therapeutic assessment?
Yeah. Well, when I started my practice and I was marketing more, I'm not doing so much of that now, but when I would sort of talk about what I did, I would say, I do this like really neat assessment approach, which is called therapeutic assessment. And it's this approach where clients, we can find out more about clients, but they feel really safe, and they get this feedback report, and it helps, especially if you're feeling stuck or you can't figure out what's going on with the client. So with other therapists, I tended to lead, or psychiatrists, I tended to lead with, if you're confused about what's going on, this is a great way to clarify for both you and the client. That was a sort of a good marketing hook. And then one thing I would offer, and usually other therapists find this very exciting, because I'm not trying to take anybody's clients. Like you can sort of say, you can come for the feedback session. The clients, if you have a really good relationship with a therapist, clients may want to bring their therapist with for the session where you discuss the results. And the therapist can also be involved in the questions. They can help designate that. But usually people are very excited by that. Like that seems really fun. And there were a couple of psychiatrists where I just said, listen, just send me somebody you're stuck with. This is low investment for me to do like 1 or 2 assessments for people just so they can see. And in that case, then they can just send somebody over for a 2 or 3 session, meeting. And then I write the report. And I think the rest is sort of history because they see how valuable it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that line. Send me someone you're stuck with.
Yeah. Because we all have those, right? We all have those.
Of course.
Difficult cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about what this actually looks like with the client. So how do you tend to structure your feedback sessions once you've given the PAI and have the report ready?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing is, before you even get to feedback, you sort of have to help them construct a question. So the key is really in helping clients come up with questions that are answerable by the data. And almost any question can be reframed, that is something that's answerable by, depending on the assessment measures that you use. And obviously you tailor the assessment measures to the question. So there's a couple of things. So I'll give an example, another example case that was kind of an interesting one. So I saw someone who was, I think this is kind of a fun one. So I saw somebody who was like really high functioning, professional, felt really healthy, felt really good about her life, and, solid marriage, good relationship with her kids. I'm modifying a couple little details in here just to de-identify it. But mainly, so mainly the questions were, I feel like I'm really healthy. I've been in and out of therapy. Like all my therapists say I'm healthy. Like, I feel pretty good. Am I as psychologically healthy as I think? Was one question. Right? So that's a good one. Is my relationship like my relational, my approach to life in terms of relationships, like as healthy as I think it is? So if you think about the PAI, there are some measures of relationships and like negative relationship history and impulsive style. And there's also like verbal aggression. So you can look at, if somebody tends to be aggressive versus assertive, all that. So are my relationships as healthy? And then the third was, I have this weight that I cannot lose and I feel that I'm really healthy, but, all my efforts to diet and get rid of these last like 50 pounds, I cannot shake this weight. Is there anything this test can tell me about why that might be? So that's all in the questions, right? And when she had that question, I was like, how am I going to get from that, how am I going to get from what the data is or what the data are in the scales to answering that? But I had this little idea, right? Maybe I would include a trauma measure because I work with trauma. She hadn't mentioned any trauma, but sometimes trauma comes out in interesting ways. And I knew I'd get a little bit of trauma data from the PAI, but I wanted a little bit more. And so that's what I did. And so if we go with, just a little bit more about how it's done. So you come up with 3 or 4 questions with the client. You help them. So if someone says like, am I an angry person? You can say like, well, what does the test tell me about anger in relationships? A lot of people ask like, am I an introvert? Things like that. Those are fairly, those are more easily answerable. But the Stephen Finn's way is that you design your feedback in a set of levels. So you have level 1 questions, which are questions that wouldn't be very upsetting. That would be like if somebody asked, am I an introvert? And they very well knew they were an introvert and they were just kind of curious if that's what the test said. So it's not that upsetting, right, to hear like, yeah, you are an introvert. Like it wouldn't be upsetting, right? Right? So level 2 questions are like, well, maybe this would be kind of hard to hear. This isn't how I saw myself, but like it makes sense to me. It's like, well, I always thought I was assertive. The test says I'm a little aggressive. Like that, I get that. That makes sense. All right, maybe I'm maybe I'm a little more than assertive, right? Like that's not such a hard pill to swallow. Level 3 questions are ones where maybe it's painful. Like maybe the feedback is hard to take. And that question that this woman asked about her weight, why can't I lose the weight? I was pretty sure it was going to be a level 3 question. So,
what gave you that impression?
Well, it's such a loaded topic, right? Like why can't, I'm dieting, I'm trying to lose 50 pounds. Like what's wrong? Why can't I lose the weight? That's such a sensitive issue, right? Weight and diet and eating. particularly if my like clinical nose was right, that maybe there was a trauma piece, that's going to be a hard message to deliver, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, maybe this, maybe that, but here, like, that's a tough conceptualization. So really these questions are inviting clients to hypothesize with you and case conceptualize with you. So sure enough, the test, the PII looked great. She looked psychologically healthy. There was a little bit of hypervigilance, and that the PTSD kind of subscales were a little elevated, but I probably wouldn't have looked twice at them. But I think I gave her the trauma symptom inventory or something else. And there she looked elevated in tolerance of strong emotions. I forget what the subscale is, and I might be remembering the test I gave her wrong. But it was one that had a measure of tension reduction and affect regulation. So basically what the therapeutic assessment suggested was that she was really effectively compartmentalizing her trauma. She was super high functioning. She didn't have any depression or anxiety, but she had an elevation in her need for tension reduction and strategies to regulate affect. So what that suggested, and again, we can't know for sure, but what that suggested is the weight was probably the last, eating and diet was probably the last kind of final defense against the trauma. And so again, that's a level 3 feedback, right? Like, yeah, you're right. You're healthy. You're psychologically healthy. And you know what? You're right. Your relationship style is wonderful. And this one's going to be painful and this one's going to be harder to hear. But what this data makes me wonder about is if this might be going on. And that was a powerful feedback session.
Oh my gosh, yes. How did she take that?
She took it, great. She was like, I need to learn how to feel. I never really, like as so many people that are high functioning and professional, and I mean, all of us, regardless of function, sometimes we forget that like feeling our emotions is an important part of living. And I think she just had a number of strategies to not feel things that were difficult, but she hadn't thought twice about it because they were working. So it was emotional, but she was also really hopeful because it made so much sense to her. So she was quite happy. And she felt, very validated and seen. I think that's the other thing about therapeutic assessment is people really feel understood. Like, okay, I am really healthy. I mean, she was like looking over her shoulder thinking maybe I'm not as psychologically as well as I think I am. And yet she was. She was psychologically doing well, but she just had this one coping strategy that wasn't working for her.
Right. That is such a nice case where it sounds like it was both validating but also illuminated some things for her that were really valuable and even hard to hear, but that it gave her some really valuable information.
Right. And see, that's such a great example of a therapeutic assessment case, right? Because that's assessment being used for therapeutically something very positive for the client. You're using the data to help you with this conceptualization, and clients can take something so positive from it. And that's exactly what happened.
I love that. And I think I also have to just note too, Megan, that it seems like you have a level of sophistication with the interpretation of the data that is really admirable to pull those things apart and make some of those conclusions. I don't know that, I think that's one of the downfalls of assessment, is people say, oh, it's just data and it's dry, but you just gave us a great example of how you can put a couple measures together and really look at the whole picture and pull something really meaningful from it.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. That's such a good point. I'm so glad that you said that because you're right. I mean, to do this, you really need to know the measures very well. I mean, this isn't like getting a printout, like I know the PAI has a printout, the MMPI I think probably has a printout. I use the NEO-PI, it has a printout, and you cannot rely on just that. You have to really know these measures. And I would say taking workshops in the PII or the NEO or the MMPI or whatever, because again, this is also something that can be used with kids. This can be used in neuropsych. You have to know these measures really well. And really you have to know, the whole idea that, Stephen Finn is wanting to do credentialing for therapeutic assessment is so that people truly know what they're doing and how to do it, because you don't want to be careless in giving this very important, it's very deep important feedback that we're giving people. So it's probably something that requires, certainly a bit of training and, or a lot of training depending on, what you're thinking. But yes, thank you. I feel good about my knowledge of these tests, but it's, it's taken a while, but yeah, it helps.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's clear that you're pretty familiar with them. Yeah, that's fantastic. Just for people listening, do you have any suggestions, maybe books or websites or articles or seminars? That's a lot of options, by the way, for anyone who is interested in really diving deep into, say, the PAI and getting past just that printout level interpretation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I like, all right, let's set the timer. I could go on about this all day.
Fair enough. Well, maybe I could help you out here. Would it be worthwhile to just say, hey, we'll put some links in the show notes and give you some time to put things together and share some of those resources?
For now, I'll just say, yeah, sure. I'll give you some, but for now I'll say, the Essentials series is a really great series. I know a lot of us probably have a lot of the Essentials books, and the Essentials of the PAI is a great book and is very helpful because it breaks down the interpretation of the PII in a few different ways, like just sort of looking at the overall scale, and then sort of has like a code type sort of interpretation. And that book is, well used in here. So that would be my thought about the PII. Society for Personality Assessment often has great workshops on therapeutic assessment, and the website I would go to is therapeuticassessment.com. That's Stephen Finn's website. Everything that we've just talked about is really summarized. And the book, in the therapeutic assessment spirit, is the In Our Client's Shoes book by Stephen Finn. Or there's just one more called Collaborative. It's called Collaborative Therapeutic Assessment, and it's a case book. So it describes, and that's also by Stephen Finn and also Constance Fisher and Leonard Handler. So there's definitely books. There's one other thing I didn't say about how to do a therapeutic assessment, just to add really quick, which is that when you give the feedback, the other thing that you're giving people is you're giving a written report, which, we could interpret that in so many ways, right? And I always think of it as a bit of a transitional object, which is wonderful. People take it with them, but they get to have it, they can show it around, they can reread it, but you also do include recommendations. So if someone is, struggling with, you always include recommendations. And again, it's not just sort of a conventional suggestions and recommendations section, right? It's like, look, it looks like you are an introvert, and like another one I did that was so great is there was a couple that was having so much marital conflict because she was feeling like the woman was feeling like her husband didn't want to engage enough, kind of in interpersonal situations. And to assess this person, the greatest value they had was like a high openness score. He really valued aesthetics. He valued art and music, but he didn't really value interpersonal relationships. So on the PAI, there are these measures of dominance and warmth, and this guy was very low on warmth. It just wasn't a value. The relationship just wasn't a value. And when he was able to say, and I was able to write in a recommendation, help her understand, explain to her in these frustrated moments that it's not that you don't love her. It's just that like interpersonal situations is not what gives you pleasure in your life. It's going to a museum or a concert. So just to say that the recommendations are very specific for the person's questions. And that's usually very liberating for clients to feel so seen and then to actually have ideas about what to do about it, about what to do about their questions.
Yeah, like, hey, you get me. I feel right. I'm sure that that's really appreciated.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I feel like even being someone who does a ton of assessment, I have learned so much in this half hour about, I'm even thinking like, how do I restructure my feedback sessions and how do I make these recommendations more specific? And this has been fantastic, Megan. I really appreciate you sharing all of this. And to be honest, I feel like we're kind of scratching the surface. I feel like I could talk to you for another hour about therapeutic assessment and the PAI and how to do this.
Yeah. Well, we can still do that. Maybe not this particular time, but we can speak again for sure.
That would be great. Yeah, I would love to have you back. So as we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like us to know or anything kind of final thoughts you'd like to share about therapeutic or collaborative assessment?
The only other thing to say is that since you're really targeting kind of the business of assessment, which I think is so important, it's so hard to get started in a practice, and I think assessment has so much value, is just to say that, for those people that are thinking about doing training or reading more about these things, I really think it's a smart investment because there's so much need for assessment, and this is really an attractive way to deliver assessment. We can really help people and change people's lives. And I know a lot of people that do assessment don't necessarily want to take on long-term clients, but you can still have clinical impact through assessment. So I would strongly recommend trying to find a workshop or go to Austin, and do one of the trainings with Stephen Finn. Or I think there's a lot of value in it. And so for those that this spoke to, don't leave it here. Go do it.
Absolutely. Gosh, thank you. Thank you so much. If people have any questions or want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
They can send me an email. It's on my website. My website is meganwarnerphd.com. And there's like a little contact form, or you can just email me at megan@meganwarnerphd.com. And I will try to help if I can.
That sounds great. Well, Megan, thank you again so much. I really appreciate your time, and this has been fantastic, and I hope that we can talk again sometime soon.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening to that interview with Dr. Megan Warner out in Connecticut. I really enjoyed that. Megan had a lot to say about therapeutic assessment, and I really like the way that she framed assessment as an intervention and as a way to support and strengthen people's perceptions of themselves. So thanks again for listening. Let's see. I think next week we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to be talking about how to do a good school observation when you're doing pediatric psych or neuropsych assessment. In the meantime, if you would like to learn more, get more resources, you can always go to the website at thetestingpsychologist.com, and there you can find links to the blog, you can find links to the Facebook community, which is growing, and so exciting to see that happening. Otherwise, you can get some resources for testing and building testing in your practice, and you can also sign up for our 4-week email course, the 4-week blueprint, that will give you some really concrete kind of actionable tips on building your testing practice. And that's at thetestingpsychologist.com/4-week blueprint. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you have a minute, do me a huge favor. Go into your podcast app and rate, maybe even review the podcast, and just help continue to grow this resource. Thanks. Take care.